We're going to talk now about, in your manual, it's the chapter on building trust, if you want to look at that. And I'm going to be talking about that now. Let's talk about the elements of trust. Well, maybe let's back up from that a little bit, and let's talk about why trust is critical. And some of this really has to do with brain study. The backside of your brain, the part of your brain that first develops, and it's the part of your brain, by the way, that you share with most living animals. That part of your brain, it's the brain stem and the limbic system and whatnot, that part of your brain is only asking one question when you come into a relationship with another person. That question is this: am I safe? And the follow-on question to that is, can I trust you? Those are the two questions that part of your brain asks. And by the way, with all other living creatures, same thing. Because think about it, if you answer that question in the negative, all bets are off. In other words, if I can't trust you, then I'm not going to carry on with this relationship. Or if I have to, I'm going to carry on the relationship in a very, very guarded manner. I am not going to be open and vulnerable to you. So establishing trust is absolutely critical and foundational, and it's foundational to every relationship. Now, for those of you who've taken developmental psychology back when, and I took it years ago, but if you remember, Erik Erikson came up with the 8 stages, I think there were, of development. In other words, that as an infant develops into a toddler, develops into a child, develops into a teen, and develops into an adult, they have to go through certain stages, and at each one of those stages, they have to successfully complete, if you will, it sounds like a test, but they do have to successfully complete the tasks involved in that particular stage. Now, the first one that the infant has to experience is trust. That is foundational. So it's foundational to all of our development. And I'll be telling you this later when we get into the conflict area. For those of you who had very, very questionable parenting when you were young, maybe alcohol was involved or abuse or whatnot, where your parents were not trustworthy, you will find that that's going to be a key issue for you in going forward. You will be very, very sensitive to this whole trust area, and for you to actually trust somebody, anybody, starting with your spouse, by the way, is going to be very, very difficult, because that initial developmental stage was never completed successfully or particularly successfully. Hopefully, by the way, if your parents weren't trustworthy, you had a grandmother, an aunt, a teacher, a coach, a next door neighbor, somebody who was trustworthy. Often those are the people who are your salvation to really developing trust. But parents are the normal ones to do that, and it's the first element then that must be learned. As a coach, you've got to be really understand how this works. If you don't, you're going to be always in trouble, and what's going to happen is you will not find that people will turn to you for coaching. They won't turn to you for counseling either, particularly. Why? Because they won't find you to be trustworthy. So trustworthiness is very, very critical. Now, my own, I don't think it's in your notes here, but let me say this about trust. To me, trust is founded on promise keeping. All relationships have implicit or explicit promises. Like when you turned on this teaching series on coaching, there's an implicit promise that I will deliver on these set of tapes a certain body of knowledge. Now, we don't talk about all these promises. When you're with another person, I mean, there's all kinds of different promises there about I won't hit you, and I expect you not to hit me, and we won't do this, and we won't do that. Obviously, if you took all the time to lay out all the particular promises that are there, you wouldn't be able to get on with a relationship. They are there, and you'll know that they're there if you violate one, such as you touch somebody inappropriately that doesn't feel that you should have touched them that way. They will let you know very quickly that that is inappropriate, or you say something that's inappropriate or whatnot. Those are all having to do with promises. So trust is built on promise keeping. And that's where, if you look at the elements of trust that I have there, predictability, consistency, and dependability, all has to do with promise keeping. Okay? In other words, am I predictable? Okay? In other words, is my behavior predictable? Can you count on me to do the same thing over and over? Now, you may count on me to do the same thing, but what I may do may not be honorable. So in other words, Jim is predictably dishonorable, then you're not going to trust me, obviously, and that's where becoming consistent and dependable is very, very important. That you have character, obviously, is a very important part of your predictability. In other words, a lot of people are predictably bad people, and we don't trust them, and we shouldn't trust them. The last piece of this, though, that I want to dwell more on, because again, it's in line with what I've already been talking about, and that is this word congruence. Another word that I like even more than congruence now is the word alignment. And first of all, it's all through Scripture, but it's all through the way we actually deal with each other. And it's much easier to say than to do, because alignment has to do with doing what I say. Okay, that's what alignment is. The whole book of James is about that. You say that you have faith, big deal. Even the devils in hell say that. Faith spoken without works, in other words, the faith works, is misaligned. The faith, in other words, it's easy for me to say things that I believe. Can I actually live them congruently? Is my life actually aligned? That's a whole different matter. Okay, and that's where this whole idea of that I keep on going back to, and I'm going to go back to it right now again, and that is the whole idea of well-defined and self-aware becomes so very, very important, because we become misaligned very, very easily. Look at, I have this, it's on your slide, I think maybe it's in your manual too, but these two people talking to each other. And it has communication. This is what my dissertation was years ago when I worked my PhD, was on communication. Communication is multi-channeled, and it makes it difficult as a result. We tend to think, like right now, I am speaking words to you, and if you understand English, or if they have the translation under what I'm saying anyway, you will understand what I have to say. But that's just the content. That's the what, in other words, of the message. What I say to you is communicated a particular way. And the way is communicated through many, many nonverbal sources, starting with my tone of voice, my facial expressions, my gesturing, my posture. All of these things are communicating to you. And basically those communications, that channel of communication is done non-verbally. So in other words, I can say, close the door, close the door, close the door, many different ways. And each way that I communicate that close the door to you assumed a different relationship between us. In other words, I can demand it of you because I assume I have more power than you, so I can demand you to close the door. I may do it in a pleading way, which says basically you have more power than me, but maybe I can appeal to your pity and you'll close the door. But anyway, constantly what we are saying is communicated a particular way, the content and the relationship. So what I've heard people say, let's say I'm lecturing. I know women are listening to this, probably watching this, as are men. But let's say I say, because I'm a man, obviously, and so I say, I really feel that in God's economy that men and women are the same and that they're equal and they should be treated equally and they're just as valuable and blah, 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 and all of this. However, let's say that women are sitting here in this meeting with me. When a woman asks a question, I tend to ignore it, but when a man asks a question, I really activate. And I really pay attention to him, but I tend to ignore the women. Now all of a sudden, the relational messages that I'm sending are contradicting the ones that I've actually spoken. I've said men and women are the same, but the way I'm actually non-verbally communicating is that women are not the same to me. That if a man says something to me, I'm much more astute and much clearer on what, and much more attentive to him than I am to her. What happens when you're incongruent is this. You reject what is said. And the reason you do that is because the language centers of your brain come from the conscious side of your brain. It's the left side, the frontal lobes. It's the side that I can consciously monitor. So if I have a mixed group of men and women in front of me, I know the right thing to say is that I treat men and women the same. That's the quote-unquote right thing to say. Do I really believe that? You'll follow me around, or you'll listen to the way I do my lecture, or you'll listen to even the way I express it, and you'll find out if I really believe that or not. And if what I said does not correspond to the way I relate, you discard the verbal message because that's conscious, and you'll go with the relational message, which tends to be much more unconscious. So in other words, the way I relate to you tends to be much more out of my awareness. So in other words, I'm sending you messages constantly, some of which consciously I'm mediating and monitoring. A whole bunch of them I'm not. You cannot not communicate, in other words. And you cannot not communicate authentically. The trouble is, you may be communicating authentically something that's completely contradictory to what you want to be saying or think you should be saying. And we're going to talk about that when it comes to competing values, because all of us have a lot of competing values. Such as the fact that I'm the alpha dog here at this church and the priesthood of believers. There's two competing values, right? In other words, you're in charge, but you should be empowering them. Now what are you going to do? Well, hopefully you navigate that and really learn how. Parents have to do that. Do you know what your job is as a parent? Your job as a parent is to work yourself out of a job. You don't want to be feeding a 5-year-old. You don't want to be changing the diaper of a 10-year-old, I don't think. No, you don't want to be doing that. You want to more and more be turning over to them. Same thing as a minister. You want to be more and more turning over to your congregation and helping them identify what their gifts are, or their bent, or whatever, how you want to talk about it, and allowing them then to minister to one another. I believe that's the New Testament model. But often we're threatened by that. Because as I turn power over to you, I turn control over to you. And then I also turn over to you quality assurance. And maybe you're not going to do it the way I did it. You're not going to do it the same way. You're not going to do it up to my standards. So I'll take it right back from you. So I say, I'm going to empower you, but then what I do is disempower you. And now I'm incongruent, I'm misaligned, and what happens is trust goes in the dumper as a result.